All right, this time around, we're going to talk about evaluating software, finding the best solution when you've got, obviously multiple choices to deal with. This is something that I don't think you run into as often early in your career, but even these days, by the time you get into the middle and definitely as you get into senior level kind of stuff, you're going to be leaned on at some point or another, or at least asked for your opinion on some type of software. If you're in a big company, you may be able to avoid that, but particularly if you're in small to mid-sized companies, things change. And so companies will go for a period on whatever their platform of choice is, and they'll say, you know what, it's a good time for us to take a look at alternatives, whether it's a bad experience with a vendor or just advances in industry where it makes financial sense to maybe switch gears. A big and common example would be everybody sort of moving from, or not everybody, but a lot of people moving from traditional or old school. You've got a server room somewhere, you've got a bunch of servers you've bought, and you run everything off of that, to people moving stuff off to the cloud. And of course, in that situation, if you're replacing your servers with a cloud provider, then this would be the idea of, okay, I've got to evaluate the cloud providers. Who's going to give us what I need out of this? And it's one of those things that I think we don't spend enough time thinking about it until we're asked, and it's sort of a deer in the headlights kind of experience when you get to that point, because it's like, well, yeah, I have opinions and there's things I like, but now I have to really think about it a little more seriously about to the level of, is this really where I want to go? If I was going to recommend this and hope for it to be a way to advance the chances of somebody being successful, would that be the right solution? And it's one thing for us to play around with applications like we do with the nuggets of the week and those kinds of situations where there's not a big risk and there's not necessarily a huge commitment, versus if we're in a situation where we're working with a company and we're asked to do something that could legitimately, actually to the level of like make or break the company. Think about it. If you push everybody in your company to go with, I don't know, let's just say you go with Swift and you say, yeah, we really need to do all the development in Swift. And then Apple, for some reason, just suddenly is wiped off the face of the map, and nobody uses any Apple products anymore, or something like that. Not likely to happen, but there are definitely situations where people have made big bets on technologies and paths and applications, and then suddenly those disappear. Maybe the vendor gets bought out and things like that. So these are some things to keep in mind when you're going through, and also a way to help you maybe formalize your answer a little better, so it is more thought out and probably more likely accepted if you're going to recommend this to your boss or the owners of the company. And we'll start with a nice quote from this guy that a couple people may have heard of, Steve Jobs. If you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution. And this is going to be key to remember as we're going into this. The problem here is at a high level, all right, I have some options. What's the best option? Well, we're going to talk about that and realize that you want to define the problem a little better than that. And so we're going to talk about gathering requirements. We're going to talk about creating a scorecard. We're going to talk about the architecture. We're going to talk about technology and roadmaps, integrations, and then an exit strategy. So there's a lot of things already that we can put together pretty quickly and say these are considerations we need to have if we're going to go into evaluating software. So the first one is gathering requirements. And this really goes to that first part of, okay, we need to figure out what problem is it that we want to solve. It's not just which tool do I want. It's, okay, what really do I want that tool to do for me? And when you're thinking about gathering requirements for this, for a tool in particular, and you could think of it as maybe a CRM solution or an ERP solution or an integrated development environment or a back office solution or financial solution or a ticketing system. Think about all these different types of solutions and areas that we may be asked to do stuff. One of them you want to think about is the users, the audience, is who actually is going to use this thing. Because this is going to help you color the answers that you have. It's one thing if you've got a tool that does the job, but requires a very technical audience. Then if your audience is not technical, they may not actually ever use it or even be able to use it. So you need to think about those sorts of things. And it's not just the technical skills of the audience, but it's also the business skills. If you're doing a financial application and the users are not terribly knowledgeable about the financial world, you're going to have to be able, your tool's going to have to walk them through stuff a little bit. It's not going to be able to just say, here you go and show them a ledger and let them get, go flying. Whereas on the other end, if your audience is very much, CPAs and stuff like that, they may want exactly that. They may want zero bells and whistles and be able to just jump right in and start making ledger entries. So consider the technical, the business skills, and then some of it's even going to be numbers as far as, is this one or two people? Is this going to be dozens or hundreds or thousands of users? Are they remote? Are they going to be sitting at a desktop? Are they going to use mobile devices? Not. These are all things about the audience and the users that you're going to want to consider as you're building out your requirements. Somewhat related to that, particularly when you think about remote versus desktop, and even the data and the tasks are being done, is security. Is this something where we need to make sure that this is a highly secure application, or is this something where, basically you don't really care about security? It could be, and that's not very often that happens anymore, but there could be situations where it's the data that's there isn't really private. I mean, it may not be private at all. I mean, if you're building let's say a scheduling, or actually more like a public calendar system for a rock band, or actually any kind of band, where they just want the ability to enter in a show and then everybody's going to see it, there may not be a lot of security involved there, other than the fact that whoever enters the shows, you don't want to have just anybody on the internet be able to go in and enter a show, because then it would screw up their calendar, which is probably not a bad example of how important security is. Usually security needs to be at some level, it needs to be a consideration. I've run into some situations where everything is essentially internal. So the only people that really have access to the application are going to be already somewhat trusted or secure. Okay, then maybe that may not have to be as much of a requirement for your solution, but generally speaking, you're going to want to think about that. You definitely want to look at things like response times and the frequency of using some of these features, because if it's it's sort of the classic example. If it's a feature you use once a month, and it's the kind of thing where you kick it off and you have to go get a cup of coffee, and then when you get back, it'll be done. That's okay, because you only have to do that once a month. If that's a daily thing, that's going to start becoming a problem. You can come in and kick the process off and go get your coffee every morning and then have it done. But that probably is going to be, sooner or later, is going to become a problem. So you're going to want to have tools and solutions that get those things done faster. Reporting is also almost always going to be an issue to some level. It doesn't matter what the application is, there needs to be, in almost every case, there's going to be some sort of feedback that's instant, and there's probably going to be something that's more of a roll-up of feedback, which would be a report. Instead of just, hey, this is what you did, what you just did was successful, something that says, well, how many of these tasks did I complete this week or this month? How often am I seeing things that aren't successful? And maybe just how much data did I process or was moved through this system, which sometimes that may be in the terms of money. How much was spent, how much was earned, how much revenue came in, what's our margin, things like that. there's almost always some level of reporting. I don't know that I have ever done an application for somebody where there wasn't at least one or two reports that come out of it. So that's going to be part of the requirements. Is it's okay, what do you need to get back out of this? You're doing all of this stuff. What do you need to track it, or to validate that the work got done, or to just show you how much work got done? And then there's going to be, in any requirements gathering, that seems like there's always going to be some special requirements that may be involved in that space that you're working in. And it may be more high-level stuff, like having to be HIPAA or PCI compliant, or it may be more specific stuff. It may have to do with like shipping rules and regulations. It may have to do with packaging rules and regulations. It may, think about if you have somebody that has some products, like say a drug company or pharmaceutical type, where they have some products that it's okay that they're not heat sensitive, so it doesn't matter, and others that are very sensitive, and so they need to go through refrigerated or maybe even be frozen, or just a grocery kind of thing, is that there's going to be dry goods and there's going to be stuff that needs to be cold and there needs to be stuff that's frozen. And, there's just a lot of stuff like that are going to be special requirements that may have to be taken into account for whatever solution it is that you're building. From that, you need to develop a scorecard. Once you've got your requirements laid out and you know that essentially this is what, by requirements, you're going to say roughly, this is what a perfect solution to our problem is. It's going to meet all of these requirements. At that point, you've got what you need to develop a scorecard, because you know that if something hits all of these requirements, and that's 100%. It's a score. That's a choice. Should be, if it's a perfect fit, it should be a perfect choice for us. Nothing's perfect though. So within your requirements, there's almost always going to be some need to haves and some nice to haves. And some, this would be cool, I guess. Maybe there's at least a couple of tiers in every situation, every solution, that is things that you really, really got to have, and it's just useless if you don't have them, all the way down to some things that's like, oh, that would be cool, or that would be interesting. So you need to make sure, as you're translating your requirements over to a scorecard, that there's some level of priorities that are built into there, so that there's a way to understand that if two things match 90% of the requirements, you can grade those, you can score those differently, because one, that 90% may be of need to haves, and there may be another solution that's a 90% fit, but it's only nice to haves. And so obviously the need to haves is going to be, then you want to score it higher. When you're building out your report card with applications in particular, when you're evaluating software, is you're almost never going to have an all or nothing situation. I mean, sometimes you are, where it's, do they provide phone support? Yes or no. I mean, it's, either they do or they don't. But even within that, it may be that, they do and it's free, or they do but it costs extra, or they do but their SLA says they're going to return their call in an hour. This other one, they're going to return it in a week. It's things like that. So it's rare that you're going to have an all or nothing, where it's just like a checkbox of, when I'm doing the reporting, when I'm filling out my report card, it's going to be, yes, I have it, or no, I don't. More often than not, there's going to be some level of, this is a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. There's going to be some sort of a range of hitting that requirement. So you want to take that into account as you're trying to figure out what your scorecard is going to look like. And probably I should back up a little bit just to be clear. The whole purpose of the scorecard is for you to have a way to evaluate software that helps you do it in a objective way. So you don't end up finding yourself in a situation where, well, I really like this salesperson, or I really like this look and feel, and the look and feel ends up being really doesn't matter at all. Some things like that, where there's a lot of ways that you can be swayed, that you can just have an emotional appeal. And what you really want to do is not do that as part of your recommendation, is have something that is is a strong and logical, thought out solution and recommendation. So that's what you want out of your scorecard is you want to be able to go in there and say, okay, this thing scored a 90, this scored a 95, this scored a 60. And that doesn't mean that the highest score is necessarily what you're going to recommend, but it does mean that that's going to help you in your recommendation. There've been a lot of times where I've had two products that I've looked at and I liked both of them. And when I've got to the scorecard part of it, one was like the obvious choice basically, because it was a high enough difference on the grading scale that it became obvious at that point. I didn't think about it when I was using it because I was like, oh, this is pretty neat. And the other one's pretty neat. And this is, it wasn't in heavy usage. So I was dealing with a more of a demo or a proof of concept type of approach to the solution, which you have to realize that's what you're going to be limited to most of the time. You're not going to spend weeks or months in a product to be able to evaluate it. You're going to have to do it at a shorter period of time. So that's where you want that scorecard. That's where you want to be able to grade your solutions. Now we talked about all or nothing or partials, and then sort of moving on from there, there's going to be some common software features that you're going to want to use that are probably not even in the requirements. I've mentioned support, maybe user experience, just the fact that they have reporting, maybe whether or not, and this gets into some other things, but maybe it's things like, is it an in-house solution? Is it software as a service? Is it provided to you in a way that's like you buy it once and then you own it, and then you maybe do upgrades over the years? If you want to go buy the next version, you would buy the next version. Or is it something where it's a licensed kind of thing where you're just paying a monthly or annual fee and they'll just ship you updates? Those are all things that software just in general has, so that you're probably going to want those to filter into the grading approach for these, because not all solutions are created equal, even from that point of view. And then once you have you've got your top priorities, the things you need to have, it almost helps to separate and have a section of the secondary things. These are the nice to haves. These are the things that really at the end of the day, if it doesn't have it, it's not going to bother me that much. But if they do, that may, all things being equal, that may be the thing that pushes one choice across the finish line as opposed to another. Related to the common software features, but really with any product, is going to be things like pricing and delivery. That I think is almost always, it seems like obvious, but you want to make sure you get that into your scorecard, is that, hey, this is something that costs $100 a user, and this one costs $1,000 a user. And that's, again, it's amazing how price points alone can differentiate products quite a bit. And it may not be the end. That may not be the most primary reason to buy one piece of software over another. I've had multiple times where I've had recommendations of, this is where your budget probably is, and this is going to be the best solution within that budget. However, if you want to spend some more, then you would go up to this next tier of products, and this is the product that you want. And quite honestly, you're going to see that quite a bit, where there's going to be tiers of solutions. Just think about going out and buying a car. You can get a car that gets you from A to B nicely, but maybe you want a car that gets you and a lot of people from A to B nicely. Or maybe you want just a way to get from point A to B, and nicely doesn't even matter. Maybe you want to get from A to B and want everybody that you see along the way to notice you and say, like, wow, what a good looking automobile. The same kind of stuff can exist in software. Not quite, obviously not, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but there are definitely tiers of solutions, and pricing is going to vary based on that as well. Something that I think is not considered enough, and we'll have a couple other items actually further in this presentation that are in that same area. One of them is compatibility and integration. It's becoming more of an issue and more common, but it's still, I think it's not paid attention to enough, that people get a solution and then suddenly realize they can't get their data into it, or they can't get their data back out of it, or it doesn't work with other solutions that they have. There's some great e-commerce applications that are out there that don't integrate with maybe PayPal or Nexmo or authorize.net, or you just pick all of these different ways that you can send and receive money. If your application, if your solution doesn't integrate with those, then that can be a problem. Sometimes things don't handle cash transactions, or they don't handle credit card transactions, or part of it may be how the compatibility works. For example, if you have an e-commerce solution, there's one that maybe natively integrates with, let's say, Square. And there's another one that does, but you have an add-on, or you have to get this other tool in order to do so. You want to bring that out in your scorecard, because that could be one of the deciding factors. Something that is not looked at near enough when you're looking at particularly a long-term solution, the architecture of the solution itself, because this is really going to help you figure out, is this something that is going to be good for me a year or 5 years from now, as opposed to just now. And you can find things like customer reviews and stuff like that are going to help you figure out exactly how stable and scalable is this thing. With reviews, that's actually pretty nice, because you're going to get some first information, but you may be able to contact some of those users and say, hey, I see that you have you're passionate in your response to how much you like or dislike this product. I'd like to learn a little bit more about your experience with it. You may even have, in some cases, you'll have vendors that will send you references and say, hey, here's some people that you can talk to about it. And I've even been in some situations where we actually did site visits with customers of a particular product. So we're able to see what it looked like for them on a day-to-day basis. How are they using it in the real world, and talk to the end users, not just somebody, some executive that likes the choice they made. And there are tools out there, there's sites out there that'll help you with this. Glassdoor is a great place to go for that kind of stuff. You can get some feedback on the company itself. You'll be able to see stuff about the employees and what they think about the management. You can see, just generally speaking, the industry, and a lot of summary kind of information that will, maybe help you get a little bit better feel of, how stable is this thing? How stable is the company behind it? Because we're in IT, we probably have an idea. We have some sort of an opinion on the technologies that are being used. And even if we don't, there's definitely pluses and minuses to various technologies. You may find something that was written in Visual Basic, not visualbasic.net, but actual Visual Basic. It's like, well, that dates the application quite a bit. Or maybe it's built in FoxPro or machine language or something like that. And you may look at it and say, that's tough. Even if they've done a very good job, that it's going to be hard for them to find resources to continue to maintain and enhance and upgrade their solution. So you're probably better off to have something that's a more, for lack of a better term, modern technology. And there's going to be things that's just, you can run across things at times where you're like, wow, that is definitely not the platform I would have chosen for that type of application, because the platform itself may have certain limitations. There's just certain things, especially when you get away from the more general purpose languages like Java or C# or C or C++. You may get into something that is a more of a niche language that's really good doing one type of solution, providing certain types of solutions, but not others. And that may impact whether that's a good fit or not. Take a look at the release schedule, for the past, and how they've done, and what's some of the bugs that they've run into. Do you see a situation where they fix stuff and then it breaks again, and they have to fix it again and it breaks again, which can point to a lot of different issues. Also looking forward to their roadmap. What is it that they see this thing becoming that they've created? Is that in line with where you want this to go? The problems that they're going to continue to solve, problems that you foresee your company running into, or maybe even that you already have, and you want to be able to have a tool that will grow and be able to provide those solutions as well. With the technology and roadmap in particular, touched on a couple of these, but just really with that is you want to make sure not only that it's a modern technology, that it's a good fit for the problem space that you're working in. It also is not a bad idea to see how many are there. It's sort of that too many cooks spoil the broth. I think we all know that if you walk into a situation where you've got 15 different technologies, but there's only 5 IT workers, that's going to be a challenge. That means you've got to find workers that can work in multiples of those technologies comfortably. There's also just, if you've got too many, there's just too many potential points of failure. If you have too many integration points, then it's just more likely that product's going to be less stable, that it's going to have some issues. With the roadmap itself, and even with the technology side of it, look for some critical flaws. There may be some things where they say, we're going to go this direction, and you look at it and you say, that's just not, it may be not sustainable. It may be something that's a proven failure. You can look at other products that are out there, and you maybe find some that tried to do the same thing and failed miserably. There may be some things where they just don't seem to understand the problem space enough. Maybe there's some flaws there where there's things that they just don't consider, but are critical for the success of that product. For example, it goes back to like integrations. Maybe they have a product that has 0 integrations. It doesn't integrate with anybody. It doesn't have an API and nothing. And you realize that that's not good. It's because I can't get my data into it. I can't get data out of it. And without that makes the product useless. I don't care how cool it is when my data's in there. If I can't get data in and out properly, then it doesn't work for me. And it's usually not going to be that blatant, but there's going to be some things that, maybe some warning flags that'll come up. As part of the roadmap, take a look at performance releases. It's not a sexy kind of thing to show up on a roadmap, but I think it is a good marker of a company that understands, of a solution that understands where they're at and where they want to be. If they somewhere along the way are looking at things saying, hey, we want to make sure that we're tightening up security. We want to make sure that we're spending some time making sure that this delivers results as fast as possible, then it means that they're not just scrambling, one, that they're not just scrambling to catch up on features, but two, that they realize that they have a moving target. What works today and is acceptable may not be acceptable in 5 years. So if they're looking into that, if they've got that built into their process somehow, then it's just that much more likely to be a product you're going to like tomorrow as well as today. With that, both the performance tuning and just roadmaps in general, especially if you know what their technology platform is, take a look at that. I mean, if the platform itself, if you look at its roadmap, you want to make sure that they're taking that into account and are going to grow with the platform itself. You think about it just in simple sense of, let's say it's a Java solution, and go back several years when Java 6 was big, but we knew Java 7, 8, all that were coming out. You want to see, are they going to grow with that, or does it look like they're just going to stay pat on the version they're on? And Java is a good example of where that can be a problem, because right now, whatever now needs to be, maybe that version of Java, all the operating systems supported out of the box, and it's well documented, it's easy to get access to it. Well, if you flash forward 3 or 4 years, now that's an older technology. It may be that there's a lot of systems that by default are a newer version. And I've seen this where part of the problem is now you have to actually take every newly installed system and do a downgrade, or do a special, some sort of special configuration so that you can access the older version as opposed to the newer version because of incompatibility. So that's something you want to keep into account, just consider as well. And then from a, sort of a geeking out on it is if you can, looking at the data structure and the foundational architecture that they've built this thing on. Is this something that is going to be able to grow, period, maybe, but also in the direction that they see it going? If you look at if you're able to look at particular like their data architecture and you see that they don't have anything that follows, I guess, best practices. And for example, let's say you look at their data structure and you find out that they store everything in a database, a relational database, and it's one table. Just one table, 1,000 different columns. Okay, that's not going to make sense as things grow. It's usually not going to be that obvious, but it may be. And even within that, at least you can go look at stuff and say, all right, this structure, this approach, the way they store stuff, the way they map stuff, the way they treat their data it isn't sustainable. It isn't going to work in the long run because of these other considerations. Maybe it's not secure enough. Maybe it's not scalable enough. Maybe you see it as something where the maintenance is going to be a nightmare. There's so many different ways that can go wrong. It's, if you can, a very valuable step to take a look at the structure, make a look at the foundational architecture, and just validate that it's sort of a sanity check. Make sure that it makes sense and it can do what they want it to do. I have no idea. I have an extra. There we go. I don't know why I had the communications. I had an extra slide in there. So we'll skip that because that wasn't very useful. We'll go to integration. So, and you're integrating your software. There's your top tiers, vendors, and products. Salesforce, NetSuite, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, just name them. There's going to be some things, either the vendors or the product itself, that you're going to want to be able to integrate with. A classic sort of old school was Goldmine. I don't know if it still is, but it used to be like the thing that every salesperson used to keep track of all their contacts. So when CRMs started coming out, you had to be able to integrate with, or I guess more enterprise CRMs, because Goldmine wasn't itself, but you had all these others. If they didn't integrate with Goldmine, then that was a problem because they needed to be able to at least have a way to pull data from other systems, from this legacy Goldmine data into the new CRM. And you see this now with like financial stuff. They almost always want to be able to do some sort of an invoicing or be able to integrate with some sort of a payment processor, stuff like that. So you want to make sure that whatever your industry is, that's part of your scoring. Are these tools able to integrate with those vendors, those products that we know we have to integrate with? A huge bonus, I think, in just about any case is there an API available? Do they have a publicly documented API that would allow you to do custom access to their data? And then looking, if they do, take a look at it, because sometimes there's going to be tasks that you would like to be able to do that they're not going to allow. A great example of, not necessarily a solution you'd be looking at, but a platform that has an API but can be very restrictive would be the whole Facebook, Instagram, those guys. Or Snapchat, that kind of stuff. Is the API is there, but if you want to integrate with their platform, there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do, both partially for security, partly for privacy, and partly, I think, because they just want you to have to actually go to their platform to be able to use that. So take a look at what the API is and how it works. Exporting options. What kind of data formats can you export your data in? I mean, hopefully there's some way to export data. And then from there, is it in a format that makes sense? Is it something that is going to be useful to you? If all it ever does is allow you to export into PDF reports, you may not be able to, you're not going to be able to go in and really manipulate the data without having some sort of a PDF reader, which in itself could be sort of a pain in the butt. So take a look at what's out there. Make sure that your export options match the data format and the usage that you would want. Can you directly connect to the database? Sometimes, in lieu of an export, if you can just directly get to the data store that they use, then you can do your own queries. You can do your own reporting off of it, and that may be all you need. So, whether or not that's an option. With the integrations specifically, we talked about roadmaps, and that's usually more of their features and stuff like that. Well, there are a lot of places where you've got a tool that's sort of new, and part of their roadmap is that they're going to add integrations, that they're going to expand the tools that they work with. And that may be very critical to you, particularly in a new solution or a new industry where you realize that integrations are important, but maybe not maybe they're nice to haves versus need to haves. And you want to see that they're going to be able to grow into that. So as maybe those nice to haves become need to haves, your product's going to be able to do that. The solution will do that for you as well. And then take a look at the developer community. Is this a live and thriving platform, or is this something that is a very closed system? And that means you're going to have to go through their help desk. You're going to have to go through their support to get any help with it. And that may or may not be a good thing. Usually, if you have a strong developer community, you're just that much more likely for the thing to continue, and also to be able to get help that is does not require you to bang your head against your desk a lot, because it's going to be more, other people like you that if they're going to help, they're going to say, hey, here's a couple things, give this a shot. They're not going to walk you through, turn it off and back on again, and do this and do that are things that are useful, but really they slow you down getting to the actual problem if you actually have already gone through and taken those steps. You need an exit strategy. This is sort of related to reporting and exports, but your solution you pick is not necessarily going to be the one that you're going to stay with 10, 20, 50 years from now. It may not exist. It may not make sense. At some point, though, you're going to probably want to be able to get your data out of it. Is there a way that you can put together as part of the solution to have that exit strategy? Is the data itself proprietary? Is there a lot of facets of the data that make it so it's absolutely useless if you try to pull that data back out, or very painful to pull that data back out? Is the solution, maybe it's going to help that it's an open source solution, because obviously then you can get the source, you can do what you need. Or maybe a multi-vendor where there is some sort of an industry standard that will gives you a level of confidence that you're going to be able to get that data out, that you're going to be able to get it into another system. And for example, think of like HL7 in the healthcare industry. If your tool generates the HL7, then somebody else can import it, or on a more general sense, if the data can be kicked out to XML, then almost always there's going to be systems that are going to be able to import that back in. And worst case, you can pull it into your own little system and then massage it and put in a CSV or whatever you need for some future solution to integrate that, to implement and import that in. It may be that not just it's not needed to actually export the data, but instead you just want to be able to have some very thorough reports as well. Particularly if the reports can be done can be converted to a CSV or Excel format or something like that, then your exports may not be, while nice, it would be nice to have, maybe they're not required, because you can, if you had to leave the platform behind, you'd be able to just run some reports and then use that data to populate whatever the new system is. Back to the API, part of it is, and this really goes back to really sort of the Facebook example. You can pull information from Facebook, but posting, the API basically doesn't allow it. And so you think about that with any product, you really want a full-featured API. You want one that provides the CRUD type of interface so that you can create stuff, you can retrieve stuff, you can update stuff, you can delete stuff. And by stuff, I mean data. You want to be able to do that. If you can, then again, while an export, a nice little export might be nice, if you've got a full-featured API, then you can always go through that instead, and you can build it yourself. take a look at admin tools, maybe even third-party options. Whatever you have, maybe it may be pretty nice, but it doesn't, maybe let's say it doesn't really provide good exports. Well, maybe there's a third-party tool that will do the export for you. Think about the Outlook application. It has a couple of ways to import mail and some ways to export mail, the PST file. But depending on what you want to move to, that may not be very useful. So there are tools out there that you can purchase that will allow you to help you with that integration or moving to another platform. Similarly, there may be some administrative tools that are provide you what you need to import and export data, and verifying that those things will allow you to get out of that, get off of that platform to another one at some point in the future. And then even with all of this, you want to take a look at what is it going to take if you really do want to move, both from a technical and a business point of view. If this is a bad choice, and 2 years from now you say, I really don't like this. This is not doing what we need it to. What's it going to take to move? Because sometimes all of the technical stuff is there, but from a business point of view, there is so much that is tied into that system that it's almost impossible to move to another platform. I've seen a few of these where it's just, wow, everything we do is so tied into our solution that we just can't move to another platform. Our users their heads would explode, or it would just be such a cost in time for us to move everything over and then retool all of our processes for a new solution. We're just stuck on this solution. So keep that in mind. It may not be an option. It may be that no matter what you get into, the exit strategy is going to be very costly, but that may make it more likely that you spend a little more time making sure that you get the right solution the first time around. So sort of coming back around, some final thoughts on this. Software is complex and expensive. You can have some cheap stuff out there, but generally speaking, what we're talking about here is, this is stuff that there are teams of developers that work on this stuff for years and build these nice products. So, the upside, there's a significant return on investment if you get the right solution and, something that matches your requirements properly. And that means it makes sense for you to go through the due diligence to make sure that you do have your requirements laid out so that ROI is, if not guaranteed, but it is a higher likelihood that you do achieve that ROI. Take a look at your current state. What do you do today? What are your processes? How do you get things done with regards to those requirements? That's going to help color and enhance your requirements so that you get the best set of requirements available. And then also, keep in account that you're going to grow. Your company's going to grow. The industry is going to grow. Business is going to have some changes and growth, and you want to make sure you've got something that hits that will be able to maybe not march lockstep, but at least not pull you away from that direction you want to go. When in doubt, avoid silos or islands or solutions that are basically of the kind that, hey, you're going to like us, but you're never going to be able to check out. You're not going to be able to get away from us. That's may be great, but obviously is a higher risk, because if something goes wrong, if they change direction, if they get bought out, or 1,000 other things happen, then you could suddenly be left high and dry. When in doubt, again, public APIs and especially full feature ones, are always going to be useful and probably one of the best approaches that you can take. So I want to open it up for questions and comments.
Hey, Rob, on that last thing you mentioned, the creating an API to keep your software open, are there any good industry standards or templates to use for that? Because I've been looking at doing something like that for my test tool. Right now, everything I have pretty much exports to a data file, but it would be nice if I could just do a web service API or something like that, where they could just export it from a web service.
Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily an industry standard. I mean, from a documentation point of view, there definitely is that you can see that it's documented, that you have your inputs and your inputs and your outputs. You have naming standards that they vary a little bit based on the platform, but generally speaking, I think you're not going to have cryptic names or anything like that. You want to have something that's fairly intuitive. As far as depending on how your API is done, you probably typically what you're going to have is the URL to get to it is going to have some level of logic to it. So you may have it broken down sort of like a directory structure in general. So you have, let's say you'd have like an orders, and then under orders, you'd have some API calls, or you have users, and then there's some based on that. Generally speaking, there's some security things in there that a lot of times you're probably better off to post parameters in as opposed to have them part of the URL. But sometimes it's easier to read it that it's part of the URL. So I don't know if there's something that's like a general purpose. If you're building an API, this is what you need to do. Outside of SOAP versus REST, there's always some best practices there. And that's probably I think at this point, probably your best bet would be one is just do a general, I'm building this kind of an API, and find something, maybe some articles, stuff like that on here's some things to consider to make it, I guess, as easy as possible to use. And of course, in the authentication, you have like OAuth and stuff like that, or OAuth 2, that are going to be standard kind of approaches to utilizing an API. And then if there's anything that's specific in that industry, like if thinking with yours, it's probably not going to apply as much, other than there are words that have specific meanings in testing that you just want to make sure that you utilize that, use the language properly. And just in some of the conversations we had about documentation, I think you're going down that road, is that you're trying to make sure that what you say from a technical point of view has that, that precise meaning for the reader, if they know what they're talking about, if they understand the subject.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I'm definitely sticking to REST, but one of the things I've been looking at is with OAuth. One of the next phases that's coming with the API I'm looking to build, and not necessarily just the API, but with the software, is I'm looking for a way where they could possibly script or send in a test case just via parameters, and then the system would actually build the test, either build the test suite or just build the test case and run the test case through like a Docker image. So they don't even necessarily have to have it installed on their system. So I'm starting to look at cloud-based solutions and APIs for that. So that's why I was asking that question.
Yeah, like I said, I think those are all good ideas, and I think those are going to come down to more specifics to specifically to how you want to do stuff and your specific tool. I don't know if there's necessarily high level, very extremely general approaches to that, and simply because APIs are, generally speaking, you're going to have sort of CRUD kind of stuff, but you've got some extra things because there's sort of a reporting kind of aspect to what you're doing, and I think that's where if it's in your case, I think if it feels natural to you as a user of the API, and particularly because you are sort of building that as you're going, there's a little bit of a bootstrapping as far as you're building this API out, but you're also still going to need to use it, particularly if you think about like an admin tool and stuff like that. Then I think it's that's going to provide in a way its own sanity check to make sure that what you're doing sort of makes sense. I've found many times where I start going down a certain path with an API, and I'm using it as well, and I look at it and it's like, oh, this doesn't really make a lot of sense, or it's a little confusing when I start actually using this. So I'll clean it up, or I'll change some of the paths and stuff like that to make it just so it it flows logically a little bit more. And again, like I said, I think of it a lot of times much as you would a directory structure. If you've got think about your source code and stuff like that. If you had to dig in and get to certain classes and certain features and functions, then there's going to be some directory structures that are more intuitive, and others that'll be make it a little harder to find what you want to find.
Right, and since most of the stuff I built is on Spring, it's already fairly, I guess, established in that format. All I have to do is set up the right annotations, and it will build most of that directory structure for me.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of doing something like that, is that it already sort of pushes you in the right direction.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to clarify on that.
Yeah. Other questions or comments?
I like the rest of the presentation, though. That scorecard, though, was that meant to just be that you could do it by points, or you could do it by the lettering? I didn't quite.
I think you can do it however you want to do it. I have found personally, and that's an excellent question. Personally, I have always found that I do it by numbers, and then I'm able to, at the end of the day, I'm able to tabulate the numbers at the end and have an actual numeric score. It doesn't have to be on a scale of 1 to 100. It could be open-ended. It could be a scale of 1 to 10. But the fact that I can just add those things up and see a score makes it that much easier to get a grade at the end of the day.
Okay, so you're just showing kind of two different models combined on one scorecard then on your
yeah,
PowerPoint.
The one was more of just a sort of a typical a scorecard image kind of thing. You can do it, A, B, C, D. I don't know. Maybe it depends on whether you're left mind or right brain, left brain, right brain, or something like that. I'm not sure. For myself, I've always liked just using numbers, because then it's just very simple. You just add the numbers up, and it's like, okay, your score is 80, your score is 115. All right, that's it's easy enough to go from there. So it gives you, and again. You can add weights actually too. You can go into these things and you can add weights to your priorities so that your scores are really meaningful, or they may be something where it's more along the lines of, okay, this checks off 5 boxes, this one checks off 8 boxes, and then generally speaking, the 8 boxes will beat the 5, but then you got to look back and look a little closer in that case. If you can add some weighting and do a numbering system, then you may be able to make it almost like a no-brainer at that point of what wins and what's in second, third, and fourth place. Other questions or comments?
When do you think you would think about changing or coming up with a new software solution? For instance, if you have an application out there. So, for instance, let me say Windows wakes up in the morning and say they're no longer supporting let me say Windows 7, and maybe they're going to 10. So do you recommend an organization to begin thinking about changing the software, though there might be solutions whereby maybe that software will be working?
If you're like a commercial software builder, you want to be looking at as soon as possible. It can be very big. That can be a huge thing to deal with, particularly like I say, an operating system upgrade. When I was back in the day when we were in, I guess like Windows 95, 98, 2000, XP, going through those things, those were all some pretty significant platform changes. We were building Windows desktop applications, and we got on the beta program as soon as we could. We always wanted to have, it wasn't going to be a guarantee if it worked in the beta that it wouldn't, it was going to be fine when general release came, and vice versa. But if we started seeing issues or substantial changes in direction, we'll say, maybe there's like an API, maybe it's a very big difference in the API, maybe deprecated stuff in the API now, instead of being warning, it literally is gone. So now maybe you were able to limp through before, and now you're forced to make some changes. Those kinds of things, for me, I would always rather know sooner rather than later if I had major work ahead, or if something looked like it was going to be just a minor change, because you've got, this goes back to like roadmap creation, stuff like that. If I'm building out features and functions and all this kind of stuff, and I see that I've got a huge rewrite ahead of me anyways, that may change some of my prioritization of some of those roadmap items. I mean, some of those features and that I may say, I can't tackle those right now because I'm going to have to focus on this, supporting this new version, stuff like that. So I think it's just one of those that if it's going to be potentially a big impact, the sooner you know, the better, so you can schedule accordingly.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Hearing none. So just sort of wrapping it up. Well, what have we learned today? Hopefully, you got to get to requirements. Any time somebody asks you to do something, it helps to get enough details, have the requirements. Basically, if you're asked to do something like recommend a piece of software, you should almost always follow back with, okay, well, what would be the requirements to make it a good solution? How do I know whether this solution is a good one or not? If you give me a problem, that's one thing. But if you don't define it down to a detail enough level, then my answer may not be correct. And of course, from that, you want to be able to build a scorecard. You want to be able to say, all right, if I'm evaluating these 5 pieces of software, I have to have a way to point to this one's better than the others, or this one's the worst, stuff like that. And so you got to have those requirements to build out your mechanism for scoring those possible solutions. Anytime you're looking at software, because it is an investment almost always, and sometimes very significant, you don't only want to evaluate for today, but you also want to evaluate for where do you think this is going to be tomorrow, and where do you think some of the other solutions are going to be tomorrow. It is not uncommon to have something that is a perfect fit right now, but you look at it and realize that it's going to be a really bad fit 6 months or a year from now. Foundation, because of that, the foundation and the architecture are essential. You need to really, the more you can understand how these solutions are built, what their vision is for that solution, the better. Because if it matches yours, then you're in good shape. If it's going a completely different direction, then it's probably going to be not a good choice. And it's just like everything. If you can avoid lock-in, the more you can avoid it, the better. Things change. Your company may change, their company may change, the industry may change, and something that looks awesome today may be a horrible mess a year from now. If you can avoid getting locked in, then that's going to save you some future headaches. As always, thank you for your time, for just all the feedback and the questions, and just hanging out, and actually just having the work ethic, the professional ethic to want to be a better developer. As always, if there's any questions or comments, you can email us, info@developernoir.com. Contact us we've got a contact form out on the developernoir.com site. Twitter is always we've got a couple of tweets that go out a day. We have links to some of the latest articles. We have latest podcast stuff, and then just a whole lot of other industry little highlights and tips and tricks that show up at Developernoir on Twitter. We still have that. We use that ancient thing called Facebook. We do have a Developernoir page out there and post stuff on a particularly new content from our site also shows up on the Facebook site on a regular basis. And as always, we're just doing all this so that we can make every developer a little better day by day. Thanks a lot.